The world first met Alan Yu as a figure shaped by grace, talent, and an almost unshakable gentleness. A man whose quiet sincerity seemed to illuminate every character he touched. To millions, he was the soft-spoken prince in period dramas, the dreamer with a voice that carried both warmth and longing, the artist who appeared untouched by the turbulence that shadows fame. Yet the same light that elevated him began to reveal fractures beneath the surface, forming a paradox that would only grow stronger with time. How could a life that appeared so steady and so deeply rooted in artistic devotion unravel in a moment defined by silence, mystery, and unanswered questions? The contrast between the man admired on screen and the man who vanished under circumstances still debated today forms the haunting entry point into his story. But behind the glamour and the excuses, what mechanisms are really driving this crisis? We will analyze every detail, from the initial mistakes to the irreversible damage, to see how the entertainment world works and how an icon is redefined. His journey did not begin in the glow of Beijing studios or the powerful machinery of the mainland entertainment industry. It began far away, in Urumqi, a city framed by wind, sand, and a sky stretched wide enough to hold the dreams of a child who understood the world through observation rather than noise. He was not the loudest voice in a room, nor the most demanding presence. He was the boy who listened, who learned by watching the world with a quiet, attentive wonder. Those who knew him as a child remembered him sitting by a window at dusk, humming melodies that seemed to drift from the wind itself. There was no fame then, no pressure, no shadow chasing him. There was only a young boy absorbing life in its purest form. That early stillness became the foundation for a dream that grew stronger with every passing year. When he lifted his hand to read a poem aloud in a high school class, a moment described as small, almost accidental, his teacher heard something unmistakable. His voice softened the room, not through volume, but through presence. It was as though the words were living beings, carried carefully in his breath. That moment, insignificant to some, became the first spark. It revealed that Alan Yu possessed a rare emotional clarity, an ability to make others feel the internal world he carried so carefully. His ascent into the world of talent shows and auditions was not immediate triumph, but perseverance forged through rejection. He auditioned, he sang, he failed, and he returned again. What distinguished him was not a desire for fame, but the conviction that storytelling, through song, through performance, was the place where he belonged. Eventually, this persistence carried him from crowded hallways of auditions to the first flicker of recognition, the first roles that allowed him to step into the light he had chased since childhood. Yet every rise casts a shadow. The forces that would one day complicate his legacy were already forming, quietly, subtly, around him. And as his name began to echo beyond Urumqi into national and international spheres, the path ahead unfolded with both promise and peril, leading toward a night that still leaves the world searching for answers. If this story resonates with you, I invite you to subscribe to this channel so that our future investigations can continue to illuminate the truths that often remain hidden behind the entertainment industry's brightest lights. Share this video across every platform where voices gather, because collective awareness is the only force capable of demanding accountability. Let us stand together, not in anger, but in clarity and compassion, to ensure that what happened to Yu Menglong is never repeated. Let us raise our voices so that silence can no longer swallow the struggles of those who give so much of themselves to the world. The journey toward understanding the tragedy surrounding Alan Yu requires returning to the quiet origins that shaped him, long before fame illuminated his path. His life began in Urumqi, a place where vast skies and shifting winds carved a sense of introspection into anyone who learned to grow beneath their expanse. For Alan Yu, this landscape was more than scenery. It was an emotional foundation. As a child, he learned to observe before he acted, to listen before he spoke, and to absorb the world in a way that made even the smallest details feel meaningful. He was not raised in the center of power or privilege. Instead, he developed an inner world that was rich, subtle, and deeply sensitive. This sensitivity later became the strength that made his performances magnetic, but it also became the vulnerability that placed immense psychological weight on his shoulders as success arrived. Long before he became a public figure, he carried a quiet determination. His early attempts to enter the entertainment industry were marked by hesitation, auditions in crowded rooms, and moments when he questioned whether his dreams were larger than his circumstances allowed. Those who watched him navigate the early phases of his career often described him as gentle, polite, and humble to a fault. Yet beneath that softness was an unwavering conviction. He auditioned repeatedly, singing through uncertainty, pushing through doubt, and learning to endure rejection. His perseverance was not driven by vanity. It was driven by an instinctive need to express, to communicate, and to turn his internal stillness into something visible. His shift from singing to acting marked the beginning of a psychological transformation. Acting demanded exposure. It required him to inhabit emotions in public spaces, to allow strangers to interpret him, and to abandon the protective silence he once used to navigate the world. While he adapted remarkably well, this transition also introduced pressures he had never encountered. The entertainment industry celebrated him, but it also confined him. He became an object of fascination, expectation, and scrutiny, even though he remained someone who valued privacy and emotional boundaries. As his career accelerated, especially after the breakthroughs in Go Princess Go and Eternal Love, the contrast between his public visibility and his private nature widened. For someone who grew up in quietness, the sudden expansion of fame created a subtle fracture. He was admired for his authenticity, yet the industry demanded constant presence, constant performance, and constant availability. This tension placed him in a psychological space where he was seen everywhere but understood almost nowhere. His guarded approach to personal life reflected this inner conflict. He protected his privacy not out of secrecy, but out of necessity. Fame required exposure, but his spirit required distance. What emerged was a pattern of emotional isolation. His refusal to publicize relationships, the limited information about his family, and his avoidance of sensational headlines suggested a man trying to maintain control in an environment built on constant intrusion. For many artists, this level of privacy becomes a shield. For Alan Yu, it became a double-edged sword. It protected him, yet it also meant that the burdens he carried were largely invisible to the world around him. This brings the analysis to an essential question. How does someone so introspective navigate an industry built on noise, speed, and relentless pressure? The roots of the tragedy may lie not in a single event, but in a cumulative weight. The pressure to perform, the pressure to adapt, the pressure to remain graceful under scrutiny, the pressure to satisfy an audience that loved him, yet understood very little about the internal storms that shaped him. These tensions did not define his downfall, but they provide the emotional and psychological framework that makes the tragedy more comprehensible. They reveal a man who believed in dreams, who chased them with sincerity, but who faced an industry and a world that demanded more of him than he was ever prepared to reveal. What do you think about this? Comment Amen below so we can continue with the unfinished stories. The morning of September 11th, 2025, arrived with a silence that felt unnatural, a silence that would soon shatter across the entertainment world. News outlets began reporting the unthinkable. Alan Yu, a rising figure admired for his composure and artistic sincerity, had died after a fall from a residential building in Beijing's Chaoyang district. Within minutes, the announcement spread across social media platforms, igniting a wave of disbelief that grew into a global shock. Fans, colleagues, and casual viewers alike struggled to reconcile the image of the calm, steady performer with the violent suddenness of his death. The narrative unfolded at a dizzying pace, and the media storm that followed became overwhelming. Official statements were released quickly, almost too quickly for some observers. Authorities reported that Alan Yu had attended a small dinner gathering at a friend's apartment the previous evening. In the early hours of the morning, around 2 o'clock, he reportedly entered a bedroom and locked the door. Several hours later, when the group began to leave, he was discovered on the ground floor by a neighbor walking a dog. The broken window safety net suggested a fall from the 5th floor. Investigators concluded that he had consumed alcohol and lost his footing in a tragic accident. His studio and his mother echoed the explanation, describing the event as a devastating misfortune rather than a deliberate act. Yet the pace of official clarity did not calm the public. It accelerated the storm. The contrast between the serene, thoughtful artist the world knew and the abrupt, catastrophic end of his life generated immediate tension. Social media lit up with expressions of grief, but grief quickly merged with suspicion. Thousands of posts questioned the logic of the timeline, the decision to lock the door, and the speed at which the accidental ruling was announced. Hashtags demanding deeper investigation appeared across platforms outside of China, revealing a growing international chorus of concern. As the story spread, the division between two public factions became undeniable. One group urged acceptance, insisting that accidents happen, even to those whose lives seem stable. They referenced the official reports, the statements from his family, and the presence of alcohol, which created the conditions for tragedy. The other group rejected the narrative entirely. They highlighted the unusual details, the unverified accounts, and the emotional contradictions surrounding the final night. For them, the official explanation did not align with the man they admired, disciplined, thoughtful, and deeply aware of his responsibilities. Momentum shifted dramatically when an alleged final message, reportedly sent by Alan Yu to his mother, surfaced online. It contained a chilling sentence: "They may come and kill me anytime. The money I received was dirty." Whether authentic or fabricated, the message spread like wildfire, transforming public doubt into widespread alarm. The implications were enormous. If genuine, it suggested fear, danger, and entanglement in forces far larger than a private accident. If false, it demonstrated the desperation of a public seeking meaning in tragedy. Either way, the media narrative intensified. The digital landscape added fuel to the fire. Threads on international forums were locked or removed. Posts disappeared. Users reported suspended accounts and restricted comment sections. This pattern of sudden silence was interpreted by many as an endorsement of the darker theories. Fans abroad expressed fear that the truth was being buried under controlled narratives. They voiced frustration, grief, and a sense of helplessness as they watched the public conversation contract instead of expand. Amid this turmoil, the effects on Alan Yu's professional world became immediate. Several dramas and projects connected to him were paused or postponed, leaving fans concerned about whether his final work would ever reach the screen. Brands and production teams hesitated to speak, unsure whether engagement would honor his legacy or entangle them in controversy. What should have been a period of collective mourning became a crisis of communication, where silence spoke louder than statements, and every unanswered question deepened the ache of uncertainty. The media avalanche did not simply report on a tragedy, it magnified it. It transformed a personal loss into a global debate, pulling viewers into an emotional current that moved too quickly to fully comprehend. The story expanded beyond the man and became a prism through which thousands projected their fear, confusion, and longing for truth. In that chaos, one thing became unmistakably clear. The world was no longer mourning in unity. It was spiraling in search of answers that refused to surface. The final hours of Alan Yu's life exist now as a landscape of shadows, a collection of fragments that reveal more about the emotional weight he carried than the events themselves. In the quiet space between his last public appearance and the moment the world learned of his death, an invisible strain seemed to tighten around him. Those who knew him described a man who rarely spoke of internal fear, yet the circumstances of his last night suggested an unease that had been growing beneath the surface. This was his darkest hour, an intersection of exhaustion, vulnerability, and pressures that no one fully understood. Reports spoke of a modest dinner among friends, a setting that normally offered comfort and familiarity. Yet, as the evening softened into night, an atmosphere of quiet tension seemed to settle around him. The accounts described him drinking more than usual, his thoughts drifting toward places his companions could not reach. When he stepped into the bedroom and locked the door behind him, the action appeared simple, but it carried the weight of a man retreating into himself. It was the kind of gesture that signaled a desire for solitude, or perhaps a need to escape from a pressure that had grown too heavy to articulate. The industry had long demanded that he uphold an image of composure, yet the alleged message later attributed to him suggested a private fear that contradicted everything the public believed. They may come and kill me anytime. The money I received was dirty. Whether genuine or fabricated, these words pressed their mark into the narrative. They imposed a sense of urgency, a sense that Alan Yu might have felt cornered in ways that were invisible to even those closest to him. The emotional truth of that moment, the sense of being pursued by forces beyond one's control, became a chilling clue to the internal collapse he may have faced. The climax of his story arrived in the silence that followed. Sometime before dawn, the stillness of the apartment was broken by the sound of impact from several floors below. A neighbor walking a dog discovered his body on the ground floor, the broken window's safety net above signaling the violent path of his fall. The image of that shattered barrier became symbolic, a physical manifestation of the unseen fractures that had formed within him. It was as though the boundary between the world he showed and the world he endured had finally given way. This moment, stark and irreversible, changed how millions perceived his life. The gentle public figure, the artist who spoke through emotion rather than volume, had met an end that contradicted the serenity he projected. His death pierced his legacy with questions that refused to settle. Fans mourned not only the loss of his presence, but the unresolved mystery embedded in the tragedy. It was a climax that resonated far beyond the life of a single artist, challenging the assumptions people made about the emotional lives of public figures. Yet from this devastating turning point, a breakthrough began to emerge. In the aftermath, a collective shift took place among fans, colleagues, and observers. His story, once framed by success and rising stardom, transformed into a symbol of vulnerability within an industry that often treats sensitivity as weakness. People began to recognize the emotional toll placed on individuals who must remain luminous while hiding the weight of their struggles. Alan Yu became a reminder that brilliance often coexists with fragility, and that silence can conceal battles as fierce as those seen in public arenas. His legacy expanded as conversations deepened. Discussions about transparency, mental well-being, and the hidden pressures of the entertainment world grew louder. Fans created memorials, shared personal reflections, and spoke openly about their fears for other artists who might be facing similar internal storms. His life, once celebrated primarily for its artistic achievements, became a catalyst for a broader awakening. His story encouraged people to demand compassion, accountability, and greater protection for those who give their emotional selves to the public. The breakthrough was not a resolution, but a recognition. Alan Yu's journey illuminated the delicate balance between fame and humanity, showing that success does not shield a person from fear, nor does talent guarantee emotional safety. Through the tragedy, he became a symbol of the unseen struggle, an artist whose story continues to push others to listen more carefully, to question more boldly, and to care more deeply. In the months that followed Alan Yu's passing, the world began to understand that his story would never fit neatly into the familiar narrative of a rising star taken too soon. His absence revealed an emotional gravity that extended far beyond a single moment. Tributes emerged from every corner of the digital landscape, transforming timelines into galleries of remembrance. Fans painted portraits, composed letters, and posted scenes from the dramas that first drew them to him. For many, the act of grieving was not only a farewell, but a declaration that his influence would not fade into silence. His legacy lived in the emotional resonance he created, the sincerity he carried, and the questions he left behind. Industry insiders reflected on his career with a renewed sense of respect. They spoke of a man who worked with quiet precision, who offered kindness without spectacle, and who treated his craft as a responsibility rather than a privilege. Directors recalled his attention to nuance. Co-stars described his gentle patience. Even crew members who interacted with him briefly remembered him as a figure who brought calmness to demanding sets. These reflections expanded the public's understanding of him, shifting the focus from his death to the breadth of his character. Yet his story also opened a broader discussion about the fragility of artists within systems designed to consume their energy and control their narratives. His tragedy exposed the emotional gaps that often go unnoticed in environments fueled by speed, attention, and expectation. Conversations about mental well-being, transparency, and support networks gained new momentum. Alan Yu became an unexpected symbol of the hidden pressures that many performers carry behind composed expressions and polished presentations. People who once viewed entertainment as a world of effortless glamour began to recognize the human cost embedded within it. There were professional consequences as well. Projects that he had completed or begun before his death faced delays or indefinite suspension. Fans waited with uncertainty, unsure whether these final pieces of his work would ever be released. Each postponed drama became a reminder of unrealized potential, of scenes filmed but never seen, of a future that ended before it had time to expand. The sense of loss extended beyond his physical absence and settled into the space between what existed and what might have been. Despite this sorrow, his narrative offered lessons that resonated deeply. His life demonstrated that talent can arise from the most unexpected places, that dreams can survive landscapes of dust and wind, and that sincerity remains powerful in an era dominated by spectacle. His story encouraged audiences to look beyond surface admiration and consider the emotional truth of those who dedicate their lives to art. It reminded viewers that fame does not eliminate fear, and success does not erase vulnerability. As time moves forward, Alan Yu's presence continues in the hearts of those who found meaning in his work. His performances remain accessible, his voice continues to echo through recordings, and his sincerity lives on in the way fans speak about him. His journey, marked by both beauty and tragedy, urges us to remember that every bright figure carries shadows, and every legacy holds unanswered questions. In honoring him, the world is not merely preserving the memory of an artist. It is choosing to acknowledge the full complexity of a life lived under pressure, a life shaped by hope, burden, and authenticity. The story of Alan Yu endures because it invites reflection, compassion, and an unending search for truth.